So you are in Mozambique now, and I wonder if you could explain to us or describe to us the conflict and how it can be related to climate change.
Well, we have seen really a dramatic escalation of this conflict, especially since the beginning of 2020 here in the north of Mozambique, and also following, of course, the attack on Palma that was widely reported on, that happened in March this year. And as a result, we have now seen nearly 800,000 people that have been displaced from the very north of Mozambique, a little bit further south, and just from West, which is about 200 kilometers inland from Pemba. It is one of these towns that has seen a massive influx of internally displaced people, and I had the opportunity to speak to some of them, and the stories that we heard are really heartbreaking. We spoke to a family, just a woman, 3 children, and her sister. Her sister is blind, one of her children is blind, and they walked 5 days because their village was attacked. Her husband is missing, and now they are making a living in one of those camps for displaced people in the outskirts of the town, without any male member of the family that could gain a little bit of income. And the toll that the conflict has taken on the people is really horrific here.
Mm-hmm. And how is it related to the climate change?
Yeah, Mozambique is one of the most exposed countries to climate change. And in 2019, we saw 2 extremely heavy cyclones. One that just passed exactly in the same area where the fighting is now taking place. And that cyclone has really increased significantly the vulnerability of the very same people who now had to fled from this conflict. And in addition, we also now see, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic that is having a serious effect on people, first and foremost in terms of health, but also in socio-economic terms. And this is perhaps even more felt in a region that was traditionally marginalized here in this country.
And the group which is active there, is it related to any extremist Islamic group? Or is it separatist? What's their agenda?
Well, I think it is a very elusive group, and there is probably a mix. It all started out as a local resistance group feeding on socio-economic marginalization and distress. In addition, then this is an area with growing economic interests. And yes, there is, of course, also this transnational agenda, but nobody really understands today who exactly are these people, what is their political agenda. All what we see is that the violence is really extremely brutal, and people are not just fleeing, they are deeply traumatized by what they have gone through in these attacks on their villages. They lost everything, and they definitely don't feel the time is ripe to go back and return to their places of origin, even if it's perhaps a little bit calmer right now.
It's natural gas that they are exploring there. The French company Total was exploring that, and it has suspended the operations.
Indeed, there are huge liquid natural gas reserves here, but there is also gold, rubies, diamonds that are here. So there is a lot of economic interest in that very region, and as we've seen in many other places, think about the Democratic Republic of Congo, marginalized populations and resources are usually, unfortunately, a very toxic mix that prepare a very fertile ground for conflict and violence, and I think that is what we are seeing here as well.
Yeah, many droughts, not only in the Democratic Republic of Congo or Mozambique, but in many areas of Africa, there is a desertification. Arid areas are getting larger, and people are lacking resources from agriculture and looking for other sources of income. Yeah, and also so there is more conflict because of that. And I wonder, you're coming from Somalia as well. I wonder if you could describe the situation there.
Well, yes, indeed. Before coming here, I spent a couple of days in Somalia, and Somalia is really typically one of these countries where we've seen a protracted conflict that has now lasted for over 30 years. And I happened to be there as a young ICRC delegate when this whole conflict started at the beginning of the 1990s. And what is striking is that there is still, of course, violence, conflict, but on top of it, you really now see in Somalia the effects of climate change. Droughts and floods have always been part of the kind of experience of an average Somali, but now these droughts and floods, they are much more recurrent and simply do not even leave any moment of respite for people who are also exposed to conflict and violence. And that obviously seriously deepens the vulnerability of the people, erodes their coping mechanisms, and puts them in very, very difficult situations. And we saw that again during this visit. I was in Baidoa, which is inland, one of the towns inland, and the situation in Baidoa today, I think if anything, it is worse than 10 or 20 years ago. Again, with a hospital that we visited, where we saw malnourished children, and I really thought after all these famines that we've seen in Africa that this was going to be images of the past, and yet we see it again in Somalia.
Do you think the international community should intervene again in these places?
Well, the international community is very present in Somalia. One of the challenges, obviously, is the security situation, and there is a lot of focus of the international community on the security. There is a strong African Union force that is there in support of the government. But the problem is that vast areas of Somalia remain inaccessible under the influence of armed opposition groups, and it is extremely difficult then for especially development organizations to have an impact in these areas. And that is why organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross or the Somali Red Crescent are so important, because we can operate in these type of areas and make a difference for people.
Yeah. So you've been recently to Afghanistan as well, and you and I have this in common. I wonder if you could describe how the ICRC is being able to operate in Afghanistan, and how your operations there have been affected by the Taliban coming to power.
Well, we as International Committee of the Red Cross, we have maintained a relationship through all these years with the Taliban. So we have nearly 1,800 staff on the ground, of which slightly more than 100 international staff. And if anything, we are now going to reinforce our presence and our humanitarian response, because now is really the time where nobody should turn away from the Afghan people. 40 million people who have seen nothing else than conflict in the last 3 decades. And it is absolutely critical now to seize the opportunity of a situation that is much calmer. The conflict has essentially ended, with the exception of perhaps a few small areas. And we already see that we can actually expand our operations and our assistance and protection response in this country. And that's exactly what we are doing right now.
Does your staff include women?
Yes, we have women among our international staff as well as among our Afghan staff. The Afghan Red Crescent also employs a significant amount of women, and we are working in quite a number of hospitals, supporting hospitals, and we really see that our women, the women that are working in the hospitals, they can all go to work, and it is absolutely essential, because if women cannot go and work in hospitals, what happens is that women have no access to hospitals. So therefore, it is absolutely key that female staff can continue to work, especially in the health sector. And the signs that we have been receiving, including from the Taliban, in that vein are rather encouraging. We now need to see how this is going to evolve, but for now, this is what we see and this is what we experience.
And the main problem there for you is lack of medicines, of health products, supplies. What is the situation there?
I think in the short to medium term, the main priority is really to maintain the system or the systems that are in place, notably in the field of health, where there is a system in place that absolutely needs to be supported. There is a World Bank scheme that has supported about 2,500 health centers throughout the country, and together with WHO and UNICEF, we are now trying everything we possibly can to maintain these health centers afloat, to make sure that people in these health centers receive their salary so that they don't flee and leave the country.
Has the World Bank continued to supply with that financial assistance, or have they stopped for the time being?
Yeah, this is now precisely the issue, because politically it will be difficult for bilateral and multilateral aid, including international financial institutions, to continue supporting a government that has not been internationally recognized. And that is precisely where, again, organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, the Afghan Red Crescent, come in to fill that gap as effectively as we possibly can.
And your resources, how are you funded in general, just for our audience to understand?
95% of our funding comes from government sources, governments who have signed the Geneva Conventions, and we, obviously, the International Committee of the Red Cross, are really the organization that is whose mandate is anchored and based on the Geneva Convention. So it is government contributions that allow us to operate, and I'm really pleased to tell you and your audience that for Afghanistan, we feel a very strong support for humanitarian action.
Mm-hmm. You're involved basically in medical assistance, health assistance. Migration, people who are trying to leave Afghanistan is not something you are involved in, are you?
No, our focus is really very much on the nearly 40 million Afghans who stay and who have seen nothing else than conflict, poverty, deprivation, and it is these people who will be our focus. We, of course, also are concerned with situations where people will want to leave, but for now, the reality is that there is relatively few people who either want or can leave, and therefore the focus really needs to be on supporting the very people who are living in the country.
Dominik, thank you so much for this interview.